The new Lucky Clover release from Waffle Flower has everything from shamrocks to daisies, and for those of you who love their postal collage collection, they even have a new stamp set for that. So let me quickly show you the new stamps, dies, stencils, and embellishments that I'll be working with today. First up, we have the Sparkles panel die. As you can see, this does not cut out the rectangle, it cuts out the sparkles. This is the You and Me stamp set. I love the two big words, and then the Subsentiments are also a little large. They're not as tiny as typical Subsentiments. Next up, we have the Subsentiments Lucky die cuts. These are great to have to add on to any sentiment that you're creating with. This is the Postage Collage Lucky Stamp Set. Again, this can be used with any of the Postage Collage sizes. I shared mini slimline in my last video, but they also have other sizes as well. Then they have the Oversized Lucky Print die and the layered daisy die. This is a great set to create really pretty layered daisies with some leaves as well. And this is the daisy background stencil duo. New to Waffle Flower this month are the new candy dots. If you've seen their enamel dots are opaque. These candy dots are based on the same color lines, but they have a more translucent candy-like effect. Now let's use this new fabulous release to create some cards. I have an A2 piece of white cardstock down on my 8.5 by 8.5 Waffle Flower grip mat. The grip mat is down on my glass mat, so everything's going to stay in place. For those of you who struggle with stenciling, I highly recommend the grip mats. The first stencil of the Daisy Stencil Duo creates the flowers. What's great about the Waffle Flower shader brushes is that you can use multicolor inking over your stencils. Because the brushes are a smaller size, they can put ink on just the flowers that you're working with. But these Shader Plus brushes put the ink down quickly, so it doesn't take very long at all to create a multicolor flower background. The second stencil in the duo creates the flower centers and some little leaves as well. So for the leaves, I am using Distress Oxide Mode Lawn, and I'm using one shader brush. And the reason that I'm not using a larger brush is that I'm creating the leaves with a darker end on one end and a lighter end on another end. And that's the other thing that you can create with these shader brushes. You can create kind of a gradient of color, and then I'll add the little daisy centers in as well and pull off that stencil. And look at that, a perfect stenciling, not because I'm great at stenciling, because of the grip mat, honestly. So I'm inking up one of the sentiments from the You and Me stamp set, and I'm inking it up with Versamark ink. I'll use a little anti-static powder tool on that and then place some gold embossing powder on top. Now I'm showing you this because I want to show you when I make a mistake or when I don't like the way something looks, I don't throw out the whole panel, because that was a lot of ink blending that we did there. So I love this, except for the sentiment is getting lost. So I'm cutting this whole card. It's the whole paneled background with the inking that I cut down to 4 by 5.25 and then matted it on some white cardstock that was A2. So I'm just cutting the stencil right out of the center. I'll use the other pieces and I'll just get rid of that tiny little slice in the center. I have another A2 piece of white cardstock and I'm using tape runner behind the two pieces. So I'll have one piece at top. This will give it, yes, a little more thickness, not a big deal. And then I'll stamp and heat emboss that sentiment on the white cardstock so that you'll really see it and it will stand out, but I'll still get to use that stenciled background that I loved so much when I created it. This one says Happily Ever After. I thought that was such a pretty way to make a wedding card or an anniversary card. It's just such a lovely sentiment with that daisy background. But that's not all. Let's use the layered daisy dies as well. For these daisies, I only included 2 layers. For the next card that I use them, I'm using 3 layers. You can use however many layers you want. You can layer them up until the cows come home, but basically you want enough layers so there's not too many spaces in between your petals. And then they have some centers for those daisies. I cut those out of gold mirror cardstock. And then I'll pop up these daisies, one on the upper right of the sentiment and one on the lower left. I absolutely love these daisies. They're so much fun. So let's do another stenciled background with the daisy duo. This time I am using a larger blending brush. These blending brushes are also from Waffle Flower, and what I want to do is create kind of an ombre effect from the top to the bottom with 3 different colors of Distress Oxide ink. I love using Distress Oxide ink with stenciling because it's so creamy, and look at how where the colors cross over, you get some beautiful blending. For the second layer, I'm doing the same thing that I did in the first with the Mowed Lawn and a Shader Plus brush, so that I can create that gradient of color where the ends of the leaves are darker and then the other side of the leaves are a little bit lighter. Once I have that done, I'll go in and use some Distress Oxide ink to create all dark blue centers of the flowers, but they look so different depending on what color flower they're on. I love this background as well. I'm not going to make the same mistake. So this time I am stamping, but I'm also going to heat emboss, but I'm stamping with VersaFine Black Onyx ink. This will stand out because it's a pigment ink. It'll be on top of the stenciling that we did underneath. So the other thing that we can do now is also heat emboss it with clear embossing powder. That will make it stand out even more. It will have some shine. As you can see, when the embossing powder is on there and you haven't heat set it, it's kind of hazy, but then once you heat set it, it's shiny and black and really stands out. I cut that panel down to 4 by 5 1/4. I'll use a little tape runner behind it, and then I'll mat it on an A2 piece of blue cardstock that I thought went really nicely with these flowers. Next up, I'm adding some of the Waffle Flower candy dots to the centers of the flowers. Now, I don't have that many to add, so it doesn't take that long, but it really does add something a little special. I'm using colors that match the flowers, so a lighter blue at the top, kind of a lavender purple in the center, and then a darker blue at the bottom. And those just add a little bit of shine and dimension. Let's use that daisy stencil one more time in a different way. This time I have some yellow cardstock on my grip mat and the stencil on top, and I'm using Distress Oxide Squeezed Lemonade, so it's a tone-on-tone look. For the leaves, I will still do a green for those. That Mowed Lawn is my favorite, the way that it goes with other colors. I think it is one of the best greens. Unless you're using pastel, then I love that Cracked Pistachio. So again, using those shader brushes to create a gradient of color. Now, let's use, for the flower centers, some solar paste from Simon Hurley. I have just a little palette knife and I'm covering over the flower centers with the solar paste. Now the solar paste is a whitish color, but it takes on the color of the cardstock that it's over as well. So right now it looks very white, but it's also dimensional and it dries dimensional. So once it's dry, you can see that it takes on a little bit of that yellow color, but I thought it was a nice subtle background, very different from the ink blended backgrounds that we created in the last 2 cards. Here I'm using that layered daisy dye, and I have my Sweet Petunia's precision press with the glue. That really makes it easy to just put little dots of glue in the center of those flowers. Like I mentioned, this time I decided to add a 3rd layer. It just gives more petals. And this is the Lucky Print die. Now it has a shadow today. Right now, I'm only using the Lucky Word part, and then I'll use some of those die cuts as well. And it's great to use white foam squares for those white daisies, and then black foam squares for the die cuts so that you can't really see them behind that black die cut. And I love the very heartfelt sentiments such as I'm so very, and then lucky, you're my friend. Super sweet. So I'll just line those up around the lucky die cut and then place my last daisy on the bottom. Now these leaves are super fun. You can't go wrong. You can't really make a mistake with them. Just tuck them in there behind the flowers. And the more you tuck them in, the less of the leaves you see. That's why I only use one little foam square on each of the daisies, so I have room to do things like that. Here we have the sparkling panel die. Now I cut it out of some foil cardstock, and this time I'm using foil cardstock and then matting it on some white cardstock. So all of the little cuts will come out as white little sparkles in that foil background. I have the lucky print again, and I'm using some of the liquid glue to put the word die on top of a shadow die cut that I also cut out of foil cardstock. So lots of foil. These are really fun to play with, that sparkle panel die, because you can use it for so many different things. It's a really pretty die cut, but it's also could be a celebratory die cut. It could be for birthdays. It could be for really anything. I'm using some of those candy dots around the lucky die cut because you can never have too much shine. You can always add some cute little embellishments. For this sparkle panel die cut, I cut it out of white cardstock. I have it on a smaller grit mat this time because I don't need to put a stencil over it, so I'm just ink blending on top. That grit mat will hold that cardstock in place so I can do my ink blending without having to hold it or tape it down. I'm ink blending a rainbow of colors of Distress Oxide inks. Here I'm using that cracked pistachio, like I mentioned. It's really great with the pastel. Once my ink blending is done, I'll peel it off of the grit mat, place some liquid glue all over the place, just avoiding those little die cut sparkles, and then place this on an A2 piece of gold mirror cardstock. It's totally worth it to use the whole A2 piece of gold mirror cardstock. I am telling you, they little areas sparkle like they are actual little stars in the sky. So now I'll use a lucky die cut of gold mirror cardstock. I've placed it on a shadow of vellum cardstock and then popped it up. And then I have the sub-sentiment that says, "Hope your day is." Now there are some sparkle elements that are die cut just the rays. I'm placing those candy dots in those center areas where there is nothing die cut. So it's not where the gold is showing through, but it still has those rays radiating out. And I thought using the candy dots in the different colors of the background was a fun way to make use of those little sparkle images. So remember, the sparkle die cut does not cut out the rectangle. You need to place it on an A2 piece of cardstock or whatever you're cutting it out of. And I like to hold it in place with a little piece of tape and then run it through my die cut machine. If you're not into putting it on gold mirror or other specialty cardstock, you can absolutely just place it on another colorful cardstock. It still looks phenomenal. I'm stamping a couple of sub-sentiments. The I Feel So is from the You and Me stamp set. The To Have a is actually from the Lucky Postage Collage stamp set. So I'll use that at the end of the video as well. But I like this mix matched font and all these different sentiments. I feel so lucky to have you as a friend, and it all just kind of works together. I added some candy dots to the background and also to the gold mirror cardstock that was the lucky die cut, which is just a fun way to pull that pink onto the sentiment as well. For those of you who saw my last Waffle Flower video, I used the Postage Collage stamps and dies for the mini slimline size. I also had the stencil. So I'm using that die to cut out that mini slimline Postage Collage, and then the stencil to stencil all of the squares and rectangles in green, and I'm using cracked pistachio this time. I have that on my grit mat so that when I peel it off, I really have a clean stenciled image. It's so nice to be able to use those grit mats. Now I'll place it in my mini Misti, and of course I have a grip mat inside my mini Misti as well, so that I don't need to use magnets and it holds the entire piece of cardstock in place so that I can stamp all of these little images from both the Postage Collage Lucky stamp set and then the other stamp set that I used in the last video. And I'll link to that video up in the upper right-hand corner here. So the new Postage Collage stamp set, that is the Lucky Postage Collage stamp set, has some shamrocks, has a good luck sentiment, has other things that you can use, a rainbow. So I'm combining the two stamp sets. There's that little horseshoe from the new stamp set and then the wavy lines from the Postage Collage stamp set as well. And I'll use the dies to cut out some pieces. I have the rainbow here and I'll color that in with some Ohuhu markers. Very easy to color in because each line you can just use the bullet tip of an Ohuhu marker or any marker that you have, honestly. So I'm not doing any blending and shading here. I'm just coloring those lines in to get a nice rainbow. Then I'll use those dies that came in the mini Postage Collage stamp set dies to cut out some of those images so that they have the postage edge to them, which is really cute. And then use some liquid glue to adhere them down, especially because I have Distress Oxide in the background and it's tough to get tape runner to adhere to Distress Oxide ink. I always like to use a nice strong liquid glue when I'm gluing over Distress Oxide ink, or really any ink, anything that might be still a little wet. And here I have the candy dots in a row to create a rainbow around that rectangular stamped image. This is so much fun to play with. If you haven't seen that Postage Collage video, check it out. It is such a blast. I really love this release because you can create so many different looks and effects with the panel die and the stencil that you can create a whole bunch of really fun cards. But I'd love to hear what you think. Do you have your eye on anything from this release? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for stopping by and spending time with me today. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you again soon. Daisies. Is there another thing? Oh, in the new, okay. Yes. I've already forgotten. My first one and I'm like smiling like a maniac. Okay, we need to settle down. Settle down. As always, what?